Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. I love seeing familiar faces right off the bat. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. Sometimes I come in and I facilitate those conversations, helping people understand their own communication style and how they connect with each other and their stakeholders. And sometimes I'm really just a connection that companies need to assessments and certification and that sort of thing. So if your organization is considering using DISC or already does and you want to talk further about that, you can go to harmonyinsights.com for more information there. I'm also the founder of the HR Hot Seat inclusive mastermind community of almost 3,000 at this point members who are we call real HR pros solving real HR problems. We come together these days virtually and for free. It's always free to attend our events. And we get a whole bunch of people showing up to support one another, to inspire one another to do their best HR work. Our members bring challenges that they're facing in their work or in their job search to our events, and then they get feedback from their peers. So if that's something that you'd benefit from or you serve HR professionals, I'd love to have you involved at hrhotseat.com. You are here today for a lunch date. We've been doing these since April. When everything started shutting down, I realized very quickly that I needed to stay inspired to do my best work. And I thought, who can I talk to? Who are those friends and colleagues that I have in my network that really do inspire me? So this is, to be very clear about it, has very selfish beginnings. And then a number of friends along the way said, hey, we'd love to be a part of those conversations. It sounds like you're talking to some really cool people. So I opened it up, and we have what we have now. We're going on several months at this point, and they've all been very well attended and well received. Our guest today has made that short list of people that really do inspire me. I have known Katie Lopes for at least a few years now through Chicago SHRM, I believe, a local HR association chapter here in Chicago, as well as HR Hot Seat. Katie Lopes, welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date.
Thank you, Eric. So happy to be here.
Katie, I am thrilled to have you here, and I have to start by asking, just in general, how are you doing these days? I feel like that's a question that sometimes gets asked in passing, and you expect, oh, I'm fine or things are good. But I really want to know, how are things going?
Uh, it's funny because I try to be intentional whenever I ask that question in person.
Yeah,
So I'm in the office today, and Thursdays are kind of my opportunity to check in with people. And the question I'll always lead with is, "How are you feeling today? How are you feeling now?"
yeah,
As for me, I've been learning how to just stop and breathe a little bit more. It's been a couple of very hectic weeks with different projects and initiatives on top of job responsibilities. And so I'm learning to just kind of pause instead of rushing and making those intentional moments in my calendar, even if it's just by setting the alarm on my phone to remind me, stop, get up and use the bathroom or get
yeah.
some water.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that intentionality because, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, you could end up turning on Zoom at 8 in the morning and turning it off at 5 or 6, in the afternoon or in the evening, and realize that you haven't gotten up to walk around and stretch and get something to eat and all of those things. So I love that you're being intentional about that. Just by way of further introduction, I know that you are an HR generalist with Johnson and Quin. Do you want to give people just a sense of what you're doing during the day and what you're all about?
Yeah. So I am by profession an HR generalist with Johnson and Quin, which is located in Niles, Illinois. So just a little suburb right out of Chicago. And I work in the manufacturing industry. I am under great leadership with a director who's kind of been a mentor to me in some sorts to kind of teach me a lot more of what a department of one does. uh, when I'm not doing that, I have recently just, as Eric is showing in the screen, been contributing to a book project that just launched this past weekend, which is Latinas Rising Up in HR. It's an anthology collection of 20 stories of Latina leaders in HR in different professions, different stages of their life and professional career. And so that was one of the things that was leading to stress, if I'm going to be completely honest. But we got it launched, we got it out there. A lot of people have been connecting with the content of the book, the live virtual book launch we did for it. And so to stem off of my chapter in that book, I'm also trying to continue with a personal blog, Latina in HR, to focus more of outside of my job. What I really do like to focus on is anthropological lenses. And I realize that my lens is focusing on human resources because it's gone through shifts before. We're in the middle of one right now because of the pandemic. And I want to find a way to make sure that I document that, not just for my organization, but in general, the observations I'm making.
I love that. And I can honestly say I'm excited about every guest that I invite to my lunch dates. You know, that's why I invite them. But I've been particularly excited about this conversation. A lot of our discussions have revolved around human resources. But suddenly, when you said, you know, I came to you and I said, Katie, I would love to feature you on a lunch date. You know, what topic do you want to discuss? And you chose HR anthropology and started telling me about some of this lens that you're using to view HR. I thought, what a unique conversation. So I'm really eager to get into this. And I want to welcome, you'll see in the chat area, for those of us who are playing along at home, which, as I've said, should be just about everybody these days. Some people are in the office. I think you're in the office.
Yes.
We're seeing West Virginia. John is coming in from outside of Washington, D.C. Hannah, Helsinki, Finland. Hannah's joined us for a number of these. We have some people from Chicago. Priscilla, who I know you're working with on the book, and the launch is with us. And who else do I see here? I think Zuitza, who is a relatively new member of the HR Hot Seat Chicago community. So I love seeing so many familiar names and faces. Katie, what is it about this particular topic? And actually, before I even ask you this question, I'm going to launch a quick poll that I put together. It's kind of a fun one. It's more of a quiz, I suppose, than a poll. And it asks, which of the following is not considered one of the major fields of anthropology? So we have biology, culture, linguistics, sourdough baking, and archaeology. I'm just putting it out there. It's not entirely academic as far as quizzes go, but I thought it would be fun to start with that. Why is it that you have this passion specifically for anthropology and using this lens of anthropology to better understand how we can be more inclusive as HR professionals? What is this passion all about for you?
Anthropology was introduced to me in college on an academia level. It it was a word that first got introduced to me in high school, if you can believe it or not. I was involved with the Gay Straight Alliance Network at the time in leading youth seminars to help encourage local high school students on how to go about creating, GSA chapters in their schools, how they could become an advocate. I was leading conversations in small groups settings about, the controversy about different things in the LGBTQ community. And one of my professors noticed, hey, you have so much passion about kind of zeroing in on a specific cause or a group. Do you want to go to college? I was like, I'm not sure. He's like, well, why don't you look at college and why don't you look at courses of anthropology? I was like, what's anthropology? Nobody's ever talked about this. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have even explored the interest of anthropology. So when I enrolled in college, I got admitted, I started going to classes. I always picked up a course or two for anthropology. And it started in these large lecture halls before they started kind of getting smaller and smaller and smaller until they were in sizes of 10 people, no more. And what kept pulling me back into anthropology was that there were different ways that we could look at humans. And it was the one space that I felt like I could navigate in college that was the safe space for us to really just kind of stop, reflect about maybe a specific time period, a specific group, a specific cause, and let's dive deeper into what that topic is that's motivating these groups. What is it that is enabling them to communicate through conflict a little bit more strategically? What is the driving force that makes tribes, succeed out in different communities. And I was just fascinated with that idea. So the anthropology course is really focused on that. I speak about this in the blog a little bit because anthropology is very much more this observational lens where you kind of sometimes step outside and you look on the you're looking inside into the group to kind of take a look of, well, I'm observing this is what's happening, I'm making my observations, and this is how it connects. And sometimes anthropologists in general need to make that change of stepping in and immersing themselves with the culture, with the group that they want to observe, to really understand what that group needs, how that group is functioning, how they operate to really thrive together. Um, which is, I'm sure if there are HR professionals on the call today, sometimes that's how it feels, that the kind of work you do with your organization. You're sometimes just called in or pulled in to observe a certain matter or situation where all of a sudden you have to figure out how to navigate these relationships, these communication barriers. And I saw that similarity between
Yeah.
anthropology.
It sounds to me, this is so fascinating. I wish we had so much more time than we do, but it seems to me that yes, we do have HR professionals, and we've titled this the HR Anthropologist Informing Inclusion. But it strikes me suddenly that what you're talking about is valuable to whatever we may happen to be doing, and at whatever level we might be leading or whatever discipline or profession we may have chosen, that
Yeah.
that it's almost like you're defining empathy. I don't know that you've used that word yet, right? But is that really baked into what you appreciate about the science of anthropology?
I think it could be a way to describe empathy. There are different styles of anthropology. So, for example, if we focus on the biological perspective of anthropology, where we're studying science, more of the themes and topics related to evolution of humans, I'm not sure how much empathy you may get out of it. But if you view that subject through a lens or through the study of ethnography of biological anthropology, I think that component could lead to just kind of show you the tools or maybe guide you through the process of how to express empathy
Yeah.
in your findings or in your observations.
So much of what we're just talking about these days is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I specifically love this piece about informing inclusion, that anthropology as a science and as a study can help you better understand not cultures, not only from afar, as you've already done a great job of describing, but insert yourself into these cultures and into these. I think you use the word tribes,
Yeah.
demographics, subgroups, whatever you want to use, in a way that you might not otherwise, because you've taken a keen interest and curiosity in what they value, what they prioritize, and how they speak, and how they come together, and how communities are formed. I'm going to launch the results of the poll, and some people thought biology may not be one of the four major fields. Most people caught on to sourdough baking. Okay, that's, you got me there. We even had some people consider archaeology not one of the major fields. Of those five there, Katie, which one or ones are not considered among the four major fields of anthropology?
Sourdough baking, unfortunately, is not one of the major fields. It's delicious.
It should be. We should rally for that. But you're saying then that biology, culture, linguistics, and archaeology are the four major components of the study of anthropology at this point.
Yes.
Wonderful. So which of those four then do you find yourself gravitating toward in the HR work that you're doing?
In the work I'm doing, uh, that's a good question. It would probably be a fine balance between culture and linguistics.
Okay.
Um, so the linguistics portion is more about the study the of how language is used to communicate within groups. Uh, you'll have speech pathologists who focus in a very different manner of it, but within anthropology, it's understanding that language has a huge influence in cultural settings. The reason I practice that more in my work is because I have a multilingual workforce where if certain issues come up and I may have to lead employee investigations, I'm often included in any that require Spanish translations. And so it's making sure that I am still holding true to like my values, that if I'm here to represent as a voice to the employee who needs that assistance for, difficult conversation they're having, I'm representing that voice truly and accurate as possible. I don't want to put my bias or my perception of the situation into it. And the other half would be cultural. It's always at the end of the day, if it's an employee investigation, I have to step aside after taking all my notes to kind of assess the entire situation investigation to figure out what's going on, what is the problem that has been described, what is the problem that I observed based on my notes, what are maybe other observations I made in just my general investigation overall that may be affecting the situation. Because we always know that a problem isn't always just one on one. There could be this one person who is experiencing so many other external factors from their home life. With social movements right now, it's affecting a lot of emotional behavior, mental behavior, etc. So I would navigate between those two, cultural and linguistics.
I particularly like the linguistics piece in the work that I do with the DISC personality assessment. I'm always talking about speaking other people's languages and not making them speak yours, but learning, caring enough to learn the language that other people speak. And quite often I'm using that sort of as an analogy or a metaphor, in terms of DISC
Yeah.
language, I suppose. But what I like what you're describing is that you are literally speaking other people's languages. Like that's how intentional you are about wanting to understand things from somebody else's perspective, is that you have the ability to speak their language in a way that not everybody can. I'd imagine that that really begins to bridge some gaps between you and the employees that you're serving.
Yes, that's exactly how you said it. It bridges the miscommunication that will happen, where we have unofficial translators available in departments who want to help, but something gets lost in translation,
Yeah.
and sometimes the problem gets to be a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes where I'll step in to kind of understand how have things been communicated, because it's not just always the language itself. So English and Spanish are the two languages I'll navigate between,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also the means of the channel of communication. One of the changes that I mentioned about HR going through right now is adapting to everything becoming so much more virtual. Um, and it's great. That's a change that needs to happen. And it's going to influence so much of the next movement of HR, how we adapt and help our people in organizations. But we cannot forget that right now, we still have multiple generations in the workforce, some that are in the process of trying to transition or plan that out. And if you're trying to communicate explicitly through virtual means only, they may not understand that method of communication. They may not understand email. They don't have smartphones. They have trouble with internet access. They have all these barriers. And yet, if we keep pushing so much with technology and ignore all this past history, um, we're leaving employees behind.
Yeah. That's such an important point to make. And I was going to, people who attend the lunch dates know that we talk about challenges that we face, and then our guests offer some sort of tips and resources. So I feel like you've made that transition now into the challenges that we face. And one sounds like you're saying is the assumption that this some virtual what we're doing now, virtual communication, virtual interaction, virtual community, that we may either take for granted or just assume is the common language, shouldn't be assumed as a comfortable common language for all people.
Yeah, definitely.
What are, as you think about some of the other challenges related to the ability or even willingness of HR professionals to look at inclusion and look at the teams that they're serving through this lens of anthropology, what are one or two other primary challenges that you perceive in the workplace?
Um, I think one of the challenges that have been kind of expressed in multiple situations, like with people I'll speak to with their HR departments, is that you may have a group or a dedicated committee for DE&I efforts, and sometimes that in itself, people have assumed that that is the mission goal. when maybe we need to pause for a moment and define DEI is just one method of achieving specific goals, but it is up to the company leaders to determine what those goals are and also as a way to hold them accountable to it. You'll have committees that are so, dedicated to these efforts of providing workshops, providing the discussions, providing the safe spaces to have these discussions of how to help each other out. But if at the end of the day, you have that committee that is serving the general population, but you don't have the support from top top management, that's how far is your DE&I effort going to go? You need to be able to make sure that DNI is just one of the methods of what will help guide the conversation to establish the values, but you need management to get on it to also commit to it. Um,
Let me pause just long enough to say for those who aren't in the know, and we've used these acronyms quite a bit already, but D&I is typically referred to as diversity and inclusion. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And sometimes you even see belonging thrown in, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. There may even be a fifth term that I'm not as familiar with. We use them somewhat interchangeably, but it's interesting to hear what version of those terms people are using, because depending on what article you pull up these days, there may be another term kind of in the mix. As you're talking about this, Katie, and not to completely derail you, because I appreciate what you were adding there, but always interested in people's perspective. Of the
mhm.
terms diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, is there any one of those four that really resonates most with you, given the work that you do as an HR pro?
Inclusion.
Yeah.
I think inclusion is always going to tie back to the culture you're setting for your company. Um, it's I think it's really closely tied to anthropology. It's not just about observing, but it's also about just how are your groups working? How are they communicating to make sure that it's not just for the functionality of the business, but so that people can feel connected and valued at work.
Yes, I love that. You're speaking my language. One of my favorite things about lunch dates is nothing is scripted. I choose my guests, they choose our topics. I give them a sense that we're going to talk about challenges and tips, etc. But the fact that you show up and you start using words like intentionality and value and connection, like I love that stuff just happens organically, and it
Yeah.
ties us back to this through line, I think, the central theme to all lunch dates, which is meaningful connection. If you go back and look at any of them, I promise videos are going to make their way to YouTube at some point. You go back and look at any of them, or you go to the calendar, every conversation we've had is tied back in some way to meaningful connection between people. And I just love that. And the fact that you value inclusion so much, I think, is probably making you a better HR professional, but would make each of us better in whatever work we've chosen, right? If we can be more intentional about being inclusive in that work. I want to just point out some of the stuff that's showing up in the chat. First of all, hello to Allison from Novi. Allison shows up to a number of these lunch dates. I love seeing her on. Zuitza is suggesting a book called The Culture Map, Breaking Through the Invisible Boundaries of Global Business. She says that there's great strategies in there regarding connecting. So if I can, I'll try to include a link to that in the follow-up email that I'll send out. Jane, who has a number of HR students that she is responsible for. She's saying that she finds insightful that our employees and our students and our friends are all holistic individuals. And the more that we welcome and listen to their life stories, which I don't know if you'll agree with this, Katie, but going back, in the practice of HR, and I would say in the workplace in general,
Mhm.
sometimes people have been discouraged from bringing their whole selves to the workplace, right? It's like, oh, yeah, I'm not sure that we need to know about those viewpoints, or I'm not sure this is the place to talk about how your family celebrated the holidays, right? Because we've wanted to be so sensitive to, I don't know, policy, handbooks, procedures, ignorance. um, do you like I do, and certainly it sounds like Jane is seeing herself. Are you seeing that organizations are taking intentional steps these days to become more inclusive, to encourage people to bring their entire selves to the workplace, to really learn people's life stories in ways that they haven't before?
I think there is an effort and accountability aspect for companies to maybe take the stance on some of those situations. Um, Personally, from manufacturing setting, that's kind of difficult. It would require so much to make that effort happen within the kind of organization that I work in the industry. Um, but others, by all means, I'd have to take a closer look. Again, I'm
Hmm.
going to default to research because I want to study, the population, the size of the group, the various generations that you deal with, the cultural settings, because it's not an easy yes or no answer. It does
Yeah.
require more in depth.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. I told you this would happen. We're only 2 minutes away from the end of our time together. What is your top tip? The one thing that you would recommend to our attendees today, who see the value in anthropology, how we've framed it so far, and applying it to the work that they do, whether it's in HR or in other areas entirely. What is one thing that people can do to make immediate progress to move in the direction of insight?
Yeah. Uh, I think when I started my HR career, one of the things I had to define for myself was what would be my own code of ethics and morals that I would hold myself accountable to if I ever felt like I was being challenged to really choose between the company or not. And so, one of the resources I would recommend is to check out the American Anthropological Association, where they have their code of ethics. It was introduced to me when I first started anthropology. They have 7 different code of ethics that really could just be interpreted for anybody to take a look at and create their own personal statements of morals, ethics, and values. So I hope it's free. You don't need a membership on that one. You can just look it
Great.
up.
Thank you. And so we'll make sure to include a link to that. Maybe if I'll look it up, or Katie, you can let me know if you have a link to that we can include in our follow-up email
Yeah,
as well.
of course.
This has been fantastic. I wish we had so much more time. Katie, people are going to be so inspired by this conversation. They're going to want to follow up with you. What is the best place online for people to find you these days?
Sure. People can find me on LinkedIn, Katie Lopes. Lopes is spelled Lopes. I also have my personal blog at latinainhr.com. That is tied to my Twitter, Instagram. Those are probably the 2 accounts that I'll be most active in.
And look to the top of your local Amazon list for the book Latinas Rising Up in HR, because that's going to make a bestseller, I'm sure.
Yes,
We'll include a
I
link.
have it
Oh,
here.
look at that. Look at that. Hot off the presses. We'll include a
Yes.
link to that as well in our follow up email. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, the rest of you who have attended today's lunch date, I hope you'll come back to harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. We have just a few coming up between now and the end of the year. What you see on the calendar, I think, is what we're going to have for the year. And actually, I don't have them in front of me right now, but I know that we're going to be speaking pretty soon with Desmond Clark, who's a former Chicago Bear, former Chicago Bears tight end, on the topic of the principles of winning. That's going to be in the mix. And if you hold on just a second, I should have these. I usually have these written out in front of me, but principles of winning. Oh, Jay Brown from Hub International on November 5th, Thursday, November 5th, on parenting in a pandemic. Can't wait to have that conversation. And then lastly, Thursday, November 12th, my friend Kim LeClaire and I are going to discuss turning toward each other, a pandemic's silver lining. Again, coming back to this theme of connection, that the silver lining of this pandemic is that we are connecting with each other in ways that we haven't previously, potentially including what we're doing here on the lunch dates and in the HR hot seat community. Katie, you said that you're willing to stick around for people who want to stick around to ask questions. But in the meantime, I want to reiterate how appreciative and grateful I am that you would choose to spend this time with us today. I really respect the work that you're doing. I think more importantly to me, I respect how you're doing it and in your approach, how intentional you are to the HR work that you're doing. And I'm sure the people you serve appreciate that as well. So thank you for spending this time with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.